Not long ago, I set out to do some research on what astrology sign could I find that was the oldest known one for us to have lived in that sign's age. What I came up with was kind of a surprise, because it was my own sign, Sagittarius. And when I started researching it, I started noticing a lot of how many times the word Sagittarius is written pretty much all over the galaxy. In fact, really, this should be the Sagittarius galaxy, not the Milky Way. We have the Sagittarius arm of the Milky Way galaxy. We have the Sagittarius spur. We have the alleged quote-unquote Sagittarius A black hole. We have the Sagittarius constellation. Somewhere, someone at some point really liked the word Sagittarius, it seemed. They named a lot of things that name. This is the Sagittarius galaxy. So I decided to do some reading, and I found some really interesting stuff. It dabbles in the astrology aspect of it for about 5 minutes, and then it goes into some really deep stuff, and it ends up with Julian Jaynes and the bicameral mind. So I thought that it would be interesting to read it to you. For you fellow Sages out there, this is for you, but really this is for everybody. This is the oldest known astrological time that I could find that we have ever lived in. And if astrology is one of the oldest religions, perhaps we should read its myth. This is for you Sagittarians out there. You might not have heard anything like this before. Well, Sagittarius ultimately seeks to unite man with a larger philosophy, to a deity. His is not the mystical religion of Scorpio or the blind faith of Pisces. Born of Gaia, goddess of the earth, the centaur seeks to give to man a practical philosophy suitable to social growth and harmony. Though his head may soar to the highest clouds of inspiration, his ponderous legs walk firmly upon the ground. He is not the inventor of new methods of social behavior, nor a reformer, least of all a revolutionary, but rather a preserver of cultural traditions, seeking to build upon what has already been established. His contribution is to systemize all this collected data and amassed energy. It's not that he is opposed to change. He is opposed to the complete overthrow of what has already come into being, preferring to modify the established order. He may not be the author of governmental constitutions, but he surely will insist on including a clause permitting amendments. In Archetypes of the Zodiac, Kathleen Burt tells us that each year around November 20, we who live in the temperate zone experience the entry of the sun into Sagittarius. A cheerful, optimistic, light-hearted 30-day interval between two of the zodiac's most earnest, serious-minded, striving signs, Scorpio and Capricorn. It seems perfect synchronicity that here in the United States our Thanksgiving holiday falls in Sagittarius. It's time to celebrate our gratitude for being alive, happy, and healthy, counting our blessings together with friends and family. Such a jovial festival of overeating is truly in the spirit of all-highest Zeus, or Jupiter, as the Romans called him, the ruler of Sagittarius. When we reach the 9th sign and the 9th house, we have emerged from the murky swamp waters of Scorpionic unconscious to bask once more in the sunlight of a solar fire sign, to again experience conscious, extroverted energy. Traditionally, astrologers have associated Sagittarius with spirit expansion of awareness, aspiring to greatness, and the ability to motivate, inspire, and fire up others. There is a sense of playfulness to Sagittarius, and many who participate in the Sagittarian archetype through sun sign, rising sign, or prominent Jupiter in the horoscope have this sort of playful approach to life, tending as a result of expecting good things to happen to them, to draw many positive experiences in the course of their lifetime. The glyph symbol for the Sagittarius is the arrow. In ancient Greece as well as India, archery was an imported psychological and spiritual discipline. Mastery of archery was a type of self-mastery as the student developed patience and presence of mind, learning to flow with the action as the arrow is released at the target. In the motion of releasing the arrow, the mind and body of the archer were one with the bow, the arrow, the motion, and the target. Education is often a major part of the Sagittarian path, and those who persevere in their studies benefit from the discipline, learning to organize their thoughts instead of just blurting them out. A well-known Sagittarian trait. Without training in presenting their large ideas, Sagittarians can just indulge themselves in Gemini-like babble. They have a tendency to overgeneralize, so mental training can help them think sequentially as well as imaginatively. What then does the higher Sagittarian shoot his arrow at? What is the highest target at which he should aim? The answer is truth, which is what Zeus in his highest manifestation meant to the Greeks, and is what is implied in the Sagittarian search for honesty, sincerity, integrity, and just judgment. We can easily appreciate the positive key words the Greeks attributed to Zeus: magnanimity, majesty, and power of beneficence, abundance, spirituality, joviality, and optimism, justice, truth, and wisdom. This would be the archetypal ideal counselor, all-seeing Zeus, and Zeus, the wise, as he is called in Homer's The Iliad. But in the myths of Zeus, one can also find negative qualities often associated with Sagittarius: arrogant, proud, negligent, overly optimistic, wasteful, provocative, extravagant, fanatical. Indeed, Liz Green of the Astrology Fate tells us Sagittarian fanaticism is often closely linked with deep inner doubts. But to the Greeks, Zeus was primarily regarded as the upholder of the cosmic order, cosmic law, justice, truth, and virtue. As such, Zeus presided over the promises made and oaths taken before witnesses, often punishing perjurers, sending them to Tartarus. Zeus, sitting on his tribunal, does not weigh the words, but instinctively knows the truth or falsity behind them. And like Zeus, Sagittarians have an instinct for the truth that allows them to look beyond the Gemini facts, no matter how beautifully organized, and see the fallacy. This is what makes the archetype so appropriate to the courtroom environment. Like Zeus, Sagittarians have a strong sense of justice, and as extroverts often crusade on others' behalf, attempting to set others' wrongs right. But their view of justice is different from that of Libra. While Libra is concerned with fairness and a mental balance of the scales, fiery Sagittarius is coming from the emotions and the desire to act, to do something, to right the wrongs in the environment. But the father Zeus was not simply a just judge, but was also a merciful father. He did not hold grudges, a trait common to Sagittarians, who, although quick to anger, are just as quick to forgive. During the month of Sagittarius, the world is locked in the depths of winter, the landscape quiet, buried under the snow, at least before global warming anyway. Among Native Americans, this was the time for telling stories, for philosophical reflection, and accordingly, Sagittarius is a sign of wisdom, and is preeminently the sign of the philosopher. Though the days are just as short during Capricorn, in Capricorn, the sun has passed the solstice point, and the days are already getting longer. In Sagittarius, it is the power of the nighttime, of collective humanity, that is increasing, the time when personal or individual concerns are at a minimum, and universal concerns become all-encompassing. This is why Sagittarians are said to be lost in abstruse philosophical concepts, neglecting everyday realities while they wander about with their heads in the clouds. But there is another astronomical correlate for this universality. The center of our galaxy is situated in the final degrees of Sagittarius. Thus, the darkest days of the year, just before winter solstice turning point, are tied into a wider frame of reference, with concerns and concepts so vast they can only be symbolized by the galaxy as a whole. The Sagittarian arrow is always pointed upwards, towards the divine, like the gaze of one who is concerned with distant worlds or galaxies, our home in the stars. In myth, Sagittarius is linked with Chiron, the centaur, a race of beings which are half human and half horse, their minds and hands giving clarity and dexterity of the human race, and their lower bodies formed like horses connected within the earth, the world of instinct. Chiron, the king of the centaurs, was a philosopher, teacher, and healer, who lived in a cave close to the earth, partaking of the earth's natural beauty and wisdom. From his cave he shared his knowledge of celestial phenomena, medicine, herbs, spiritual disciplines, music, and mathematics. And his expertise in these areas was respected even by the gods. Asclepius, son of the healing god Apollo, learned the art of medicine from Chiron, surpassing his tutor to become the acknowledged patron deity of the healing arts. Asclepius was later slain by a thunderbolt from Zeus, when he usurped the privilege of the gods by raising the dead to life. Even Chiron's death exemplified the Sagittarian theme of the philosopher who sacrifices personal concerns for the sake of the greater whole. Accidentally wounded by his friend Hercules with an arrow dipped in the poisonous venom of the python, not even this great healer could heal himself of this painful wound. But being immortal, neither could he just die. So Chiron chose to die, but for a higher purpose, walking willingly into the underground to fulfill a decree that Prometheus, the great awakener, who defied Zeus himself in bringing fire to humans, could only be redeemed from his punishment by another immortal god giving up his own immortality. Chiron's sacrifice allowed Prometheus to return to service for humanity, and it was for this selfless act that the gods honored him by placing him in the heavens as the constellation of Sagittarius. When the planet or planetoid named for Chiron was discovered by Charles Cowell in 1977, the chart of its discovery suggested something incredibly profound. For the ascendant at 26 degrees Sagittarius corresponds to the center of the galaxy. Pluto sits on the midheaven, and Chiron himself is a hemispheric singleton, a retrograde, grounded in the fourth house in Taurus, with every other planet above the horizon. The constellation of Fucus, said to represent Asclepius, is in the vicinity of Scorpio, possibly accounting for that sign's association with the medical arts. But there was no other planet or asteroid which represented this god of healing. Hence, Chiron, teacher of Asclepius, has become the carrier for the Asclepius archetype, and it is the role of the healer that has come to be the most associated with Chiron. Chiron is connected with alternative rather than traditional methods of healing, and his own methods were based primarily upon diet. In the early 80s, shortly after its discovery, there was an upsurge in holistic healers, such as acupuncturists and naturopaths. Massage therapy, primarily associated with dark parlors in red light districts prior to the 1970s, became a much sought-after healing discipline, along with sports massage, herbal remedies, craniosacral therapies, and a host of other arts. I mean, it's just like that. It's uncanny when you really get to it, when you really get into it. Just uncanny. The Age of Sagittarius, 19,450 to 17,300 BCE, or 6,300 to 8,600 CE, was characterized by a relatively advanced flint tool-making style of the Upper Paleolithic, referred to as the Solutrian industry. The industry was named by Gabriel de Mortillet to describe the second age of his system of cave chronology, following
Mysterian.
the Mysterian. The era's finds include tools, ornamental beads, and bone pins, as well as prehistoric art. Solutrian toolmaking employed techniques not seen before and not rediscovered for millennia. The Solutrian has relatively finely worked bifacial points made with lithic reduction, percussion, and pressure, flaking rather than the cruder flint knapping. Knapping was done using antler batons, hard wood batons, and soft stone hammers. Permitting the working of delicate slivers of flint to make light projectiles and even elaborate barbed and tanged arrowheads. Large thin spearheads, scrapers with edge not on the side but on the end, flint knives and saws, but all still chipped, not ground or polished. Long spear points with tang on the shoulder, on one side only, are also characteristic implements of this industry. Bone and antler were used as well. The Solutrian may have been a transitory stage between the flint implements and the Mysterian, and the bone implements of the Magdalenian epochs. Final finds include horse, reindeer, mammoth, cave lion, rhinoceros, bear, and oryx. I think that was that big bull. Solutrian finds have been also made in the caves of Les Aziz, in the lower beds of Cresswell Crags, Devonshire, England. The industry first appeared in modern-day Spain and disappears from the archaeological record 15,000 BCE. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, the Roman equivalent of the Greek god Zeus, who is credited in that civilization with creating mankind. As we have seen in our journey through the great years, most of these ages occurred in prehistory, the time before writing was invented, and history began to be recorded. It is believed that writing was first developed among the Sumerians between 3000 and 4000 BCE, as the Age of Gemini was drawing to a close. All we know today about the period before that time has been gleaned from artifacts discovered throughout the world, showing that truly human civilizations began to appear sometime after 40,000 BCE. But we also know something about these early ancestors from remnants of oral traditions handed down over thousands of years, traditions which became the foundation of the mythologies of early civilizations, such as the Babylonians and the Greeks, as well as other ancient civilizations in all parts of the world. In the beginning was the mother, as far back as 30,000 years ago. The people of the earth worshipped a female deity. The cultures around the world, the goddess, has been revered in myriad forms in temple and grove, cathedral and cave. She has been celebrated and venerated through ritual, myth, and art. She is the Great Mother, representing the fertility which brings forth all life. As Mother Nature, she is the living biosphere of both the planets and the forces of elements. She has roles of both creator and destroyer. She is the Queen of Heaven, and she is the moon. She possesses magical powers and is emotion, intuition, and psychic faculty. The goddess is Gaia, the earth, Ixcal, the moon, Arianrod, the stars. She is Oya, who brings the storms, and she is Mary, who calms them. She is Nut, who births creation, and Kali, who destroys it. She is Maiden Mother, Queen and Crone, Lover and Spinster, Warrior and Sibyl, Nurturer and Judge. The divine force within the goddess is believed to be genderless, but it is manifested as male and female principles within the universe, often within the worship of the divine force, the goddess, or the female principle, is emphasized to the exclusion of the horned god, or the male principle, but theoretically both are recognized. The goddess has many facets, names, and aspects. The goddess worship dates back to Paleolithic times. Many anthropologists speculate the first god or gods of the peoples were feminine. This coincides with ancient creation myths and beliefs that creation was achieved through self-fertilization. Within the concept of creation, the participation of the male principle was not known or recognized yet. The goddess was believed to have created the universe by herself alone, and from this belief came the agricultural religions. It was thought that the gods only prospered by the beneficence and wisdom which the goddess showered on them. Evidence appears to indicate most ancient tribes and cultures were matriarchal. This does not mean the feminine portions of these societies held themselves superior over their male counterparts, because goddess worship was balanced by honoring both the male and female deities, as illustrated by the observance of the sacred marriage of the sky god and earth mother in many global societies. Gaia the earth is the earth goddess of Greek mythology who mated with her son Uranus to produce the remaining titans. Gaia seems to have... Well, do they gotta throw the sun in there? I mean, seriously. It's just sick. Hesiod's Theogony tells how after chaos arose broad-breasted Gaia and her everlasting foundation of the gods of Olympus. She has brought forth Uranus, the starry sky her equal, to cover her, the hills and the fruitless deep of the sea, Pontus, without sweet union of love, out of her own self. But afterwards Hesiod tells she lay with Uranus and bore the world ocean, Oceanus, Chios and Crisa, and the Titans, Hyperion and Iapetus, Thea and Rhea, Themis, and Mnemosyne. Among the first human images discovered were the Venus figurines, nude female figures having exaggerated sexual parts that date back to the Cro-Magnons of the Upper Paleolithic period between 35,000 and 10,000 BCE. In southern France is the Venus of Lascaux, carved in bas relief in a rock shelter. Appears once to have been a hunting shrine dating to around 19,000 BCE. In this carving, the woman is painted red, perhaps to suggest blood, but holds a bison horn in one hand. Also, in Cro-Magnon cave paintings, women are depicted giving birth. A naked goddess appears to have been the patroness of the hunt to mammoth hunters in the Pyrenees, and was also protectress, hearth, and lady of the wild things. Throughout the eons of history, the goddess assumed many aspects. She was seen as the creatress, virgin mother, destroyer, warrior, huntress, homemaker, wife, artist, jurist, healer, and sorcerer, her roles or abilities increasing with the advancement of the cultures which worshipped her. Throughout the centuries, the goddess has acquired 1,000 names and 1,000 faces, but most always she has represented nature associated with both the sun and moon, the earth and the sky, but perhaps her best known role is Gaia, the earth mother. Gaia is the earth goddess of Greek mythology who mated with Uranus to produce the remaining titans. Gaia seems to have started as a Neolithic earth mother worshipped that eventually led to the Hellenistic civilization in Greek mythology. Hesiod's Theogony tells how after chaos arose broad-breasted Gaia, the everlasting foundation of the gods of Olympus. She brought forth Uranus, the starry sky, her equal, to cover her, the hills, and the fruitless deep of the sea, Pontus, without sweet union of love, out of her own self. But afterwards Hesiod tells she lay with Uranus, and bore the world ocean, Oceanus, Caius, Cruis, Phoebe of the golden crown, and lovely Tethys. After them was born Kronos, the wily youngest and most terrible of her children. You suppose the reason they believe Gaia gave birth to all these gods is because people could finally see things that were maybe just figures before, and all of a sudden they see it and they think Gaia gives birth? I don't know, I'm just thinking. If they see it rise up out of the earth, like rising from the east, who hated his lusty sire. When Uranus hid the Hecatine Shires and the Cyclops in Tartarus, causing pain to Gaia, Tartarus was her bowels. She shaped a great flint sickle, which she gave to Kronos, who took the sickle and castrated his father as he approached Gaia to have intercourse with her. Uranus called his sons Titans, meaning strainers, for they strained and did presumptuously a fearful deed, for which vengeance would come afterwards. For as Uranus had been deposed by his son Kronos, so was Kronos destined to be overthrown by Zeus, the son born to him by his sister wife Rhea. In the meantime, the Titans released the Cyclops from Tartarus, and Kronos was awarded the kingship among them, beginning the Golden Age. Well, the one thing that gets me, is, it kind of says Uranus is the sky, but how can you castrate the sky? It's impossible. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense. And then Kronos was destined to be overthrown by Zeus, that's Jupiter, to him by his sister, the son born to him by his sister wife Rhea. In the meantime, the Titans released the Cyclops from Tartarus, and Kronos was awarded the kingship among them, beginning a golden age. Well, that kind of says Saturn was the star of the golden age, doesn't it? Gaia is believed by some sources to be the original deity behind the Oracle of Delphi. She passed her powers on to, depending on the source, Poseidon, Apollo, or Themis. Apollo is best known as the oracle power behind Delphi, long established by the time of Homer, having killed Gaia's children, Phaethon, there, and usurped
Shallic power.
The Shallic power, Hera, punished Apollo for this by sending him to King Admetus as a shepherd for 9 years. This is very long and quite detailed. Psychiatrist Carl Jung believed the similarity of mythological themes found among all these diverse cultures in different parts of the world was empirical evidence of the existence of a part of the psyche that he termed the collective unconscious. He coined the term archetypes as the means by which these unconscious contents came into consciousness by cloaking themselves, as the means by which these unconscious contents came into consciousness by cloaking themselves in the everyday material of the collective societies, shared conscious experience in archetypes and the collective unconscious. He described this concept as similar to Plato's conception of the idea as superordinate, pre-existing to all phenomena. He saw this as a priority factor in all human activities, namely the inborn, preconscious, and unconscious individual structure of the psyche. Archetypes are not only decimated by tradition, language, and migration, but they can arise spontaneously at any time, at any place, and without any outside influence. Thus, there are present in every psyche forms which are unconscious but nonetheless active, living dispositions that perform and continually influence our thoughts and feelings and actions. It is important to point out that the archetypes are not determined as regards their content, but only as regards their form. A primordial image is determined as its content only when it has become conscious and is therefore filled out with the material of the conscious experience. At some level, we are all aware of a fundamental dichotomy between subject experience and objective reality, the so-called mind-body dualism that has plagued philosophers for millennia. And on reflection, most will agree that this duality only concerns humans. As far as we know, other animals live entirely in the here and now, do not introspect, and have little, if any, self-awareness. It's like I was saying, we're the only creatures on Earth that know we're going to die. And that would kind of be the ultimate aware that we're aware, wouldn't it? Much less awareness of awareness. Part of the problem, according to Julian Jaynes in his controversial book, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakthrough of the Bicameral Mind, published in 1976, is that consciousness is not any of the things we usually think of it as being. In particular, it is not equivalent to the consciousness of consciousness that begat dualism, a notion that only serves to confound attempts at definition. Nor is it synonymous with experience, conceptualization, learning, thinking, reason, or being awake. Each of these latter mental activities functions quite well without conscious attention. Consciousness, then, is something distinct from most of the activities that we normally attribute to mind. Jaynes defines it as an interior mental representation of the self, a metaphorical space or introspection, wherein the analog I can work through problems to see the outcomes of potential solutions. Consciousness is created through the metaphorical use of language, which allows the spatialization of time necessary for visualizing linear sequences of past events and future outcomes. Indeed, without consciousness is manifest. Without consciousness, there is no perception of time. The central role of metaphor in the construction of consciousness is manifest in the way we describe our subjective experience in everyday language. For example, we see things in our mind's eye. We have a gut feeling that something is true. None of these descriptions of experience is meant literally. They are all metaphorical, but we know exactly what they mean, because that is how consciousness works. The question is, when did consciousness first emerge? Most will assume that humans have always been conscious, but not so according to Jaynes. Although written texts exist much earlier, metaphorical usage did not appear until about the first millennium BC, beginning about the time of the Odyssey. Before that, language usage was entirely literal. Metaphor is largely absent in the Iliad. If consciousness is based on the use of metaphor, this would suggest a prior to 3,000 years ago humans were not conscious, and yet by that time civilization had already existed for several millennia. How was this possible? The answer is that the first civilizations were built not through conscious effort, but rather by humans obediently and quite unconsciously following the vocal commands of their gods. It's getting heavy. Jayne's study of ancient texts and other artifacts suggests that prior to the emergence of consciousness, humans were motivated, literally slaves to, hallucinated voices that told them what to do, a phenomenon akin to the experienced by modern-day schizophrenics, to the person hearing them. Hallucinated voices just seem as real and just as external as actual voices because their perception involves the same auditory apparatus of the brain. Like most brain functions, this apparatus is contained in both hemispheres. In contrast, the brain circuitry required for speech is confined entirely to the left hemisphere. The normal function of the equivalent region in the right hemisphere has long been a mystery. Indeed, it is often assumed to be necessary, as unlike the left side, it can be removed without major adverse effects. Jayne posits, in this region, within the right hemisphere is a vestige of an ancestral structure whose function was to generate hallucinated commands. As far as bicameral humans were concerned, the hallucinated voices came from the gods. Early on, gods and kings were one and the same, so hallucinations probably sounded much like the actual voice of a king. In this way, the god-king was preserved to command his subjects even without being in their presence, promoting social coherence. From this, it should be clear why Jayne's theory is disturbing to many. It provides a provocative, albeit quite compelling explanation for the natural origins of religious belief. The ancients who wrote of being commanded by the spoken word of their gods were not being metaphorical. They were being literal. But those voices originated inside their heads. It wasn't until the voices began to recede that words began to adopt metaphorical meanings, paving the way for emergence of consciousness as we know it. Could these voices of gods be perceived literally, really be the emergence of archetypes from the right side of the brain, which maintains our connection with the collective unconscious, pre-established as to form but gaining material for manifestation from the conscious context existing in the left side of the brain, i.e., nature as perceived in the conscious experience of man. These myths were handed down through countless generations as oral traditions until they were finally recorded in written word by the great poets such as Homer and Hesiod. Many of these myths referred the gods teaching men the arts and sciences, including agriculture, winemaking, the healing arts. You have to wonder, how did prehistoric man arrive at these technologies that completely revolutionized the state of human existence? Remember, the beginnings of human civilization of Homo sapiens appeared 200,000 years ago, and the migration from Africa 100,000 years ago. Yet life remained relatively the same as it had for the 2 to 3 million years since the earliest humans first emerged during the last ice age. It wasn't until 40,000 years ago the first evidence of culture emerged, and then suddenly there was a proliferation of human cultures and a great advancement in technologies which allowed these nomadic groups of hunter-gatherers to settle down in agricultural-based communities. Well, the only thing I could say to that is that the only other alternative would be, instead of an explosion all of a sudden after millions of years of being dormant, that different humans came here to survive from another place. But if you go that route, you will probably be on a path that a certain part of it will have to forever be a surmise, because that probably will never be able to be proven. Unless some great landmark find, is found on a moon somewhere, but who's even to say they'd be honest with us and tell us if they did? They may have already. I do think that's entirely possible, and they were already advanced. I do not think we're from Earth. Sagittarius the Archer, from 1603. The horizontal dashed line near the top of the ecliptic. Note that the alpha and beta stars are drawn much brighter than they actually are. The broad dark band at the top is centered in the ecliptic and shows the region in which the moon and planets can be found. That was the last time we were in the age of Sagittarius. I thought that was a pretty good read. I'll read others. Perhaps Jupiter was our sun at that time. Zeus seemed to be the god of the Sagittarian time. Right now we're in Pisces. The astrologer needed to have the ability to read the planets and stars as a seer and make the necessary arrangements to stay alive that day. But I have heard from more than one source that the astrologer walked the narrowest road.